Hello and welcome to another episode of AFGHAN Views on the Awarelogue initiative. AFGHAN Views is looking at different perspectives, reflecting on the last 6 months since the fall of Kabul, by speaking to Afghans who have left the country, who have been outside the country for some time, who have left in the process of the last 6 months as well. Today we are joined by someone who's very involved in the arts, the promotion, protection of the arts in Afghanistan and also in other countries in Asia. She is currently based in New York. We're indeed happy to have on board Leeza Ahmedy, who's the Director of Programming at the Foundation for Spirituality and the Arts. This is based in New York and in Charleston. She's also on the board of directors of the Asian Contemporary Arts Forum, or WEEK as it is known, and we will hear more about that in the course of our discussion. Welcome on board, Leeza. Thank you so much for giving us of your time and joining us on this particular episode of AFGHAN Views.
Thank you so much for having me, George. This is a pleasure to be talking to you about something very important in the world right now.
Absolutely. Leeza, if I were to start and ask you personally, you've had a pretty difficult journey from your childhood onwards. Could you tell us about it?
Well, I will start by telling you how my name is actually pronounced in Afghanistan. It's Leeza. Okay. It's with a Z. And obviously, as it happens when you immigrate to other countries, your name always takes different forms because others pronounce it in the way that they do. And I have no issue with that, but I just, for the sake of the conversation and, having been named by Afghan parents, being from Afghanistan myself, being born there, it's important to distinguish. It is Leeza, which is a very kind of a modern name. Obviously, be given, I was born in the 70s, and in the 70s, Afghanistan was quite an incredibly modern, tended country, and different classes of people, really diverse point of views and perspective cohabited the beautiful spaces of the country, particularly in Kabul, where I grew up. So yeah, maybe there was some premonition that I will be in the West. So my name could align with that. It's interesting how these kinds of things happen. Our names are given to us by sometimes our destiny. So the question you had, do you mind if you repeat that again?
Sure, because I know you've also been traveling out of Afghanistan, you've gone back into Afghanistan. Could you reflect upon that and tell us briefly about what that was like?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Afghanistan very happily until around the age of around 10, almost 11 is when we first left. My mother decided that things were going to not necessarily be harmonious for a long time, and she wanted to give my twin sister and I an opportunity to rejoin with all my brothers and sisters who had already left the country for Europe and the United States. They were obviously planning to come back. They were studying and working. And then the destiny turned with the Russian invasion. Most people do not recall the conflict and the country choosing to experiment with communism and having a kind of both success and failure simultaneously with that in the late 70s. And it was quite a tremendous moment of both hope and despair, and a kind of a situation where the country went from day to night over a very short period of time, meaning from a hopeful, a very agriculturally successful economy, although it was always still rather feudal in its status. It was working, and so for me, it took a long time to go back, way later, in terms of being invited to curate and to collaborate, although I went and circulated around the country for many years. I specialized in contemporary art of Central Asia and wanted to expose the stands and its connection to Afghanistan and the entire region, because most people will talk about Afghanistan as if it's just all the events are occurring without any connection to its actual history, its situation in Central Asia, and its connection to various super countries as well as superpowers that have been in operation for centuries. So these things are very important for us to consider. And while the majority of my time has been spent outside of the country, my heart is always there, and I have always tried to create various different kinds of connections between the artistic communities there.
You have done a lot to support the arts in your country. You've been promoting exhibitions, you've been helping artists in the country. However, the threats and fears persist, and I'll come to some of those in a short while. But if you were to first identify what more needs to be done from outside, what can be done to support the artistic community in Afghanistan?
Well, as you can imagine, we've all heard that this has been, in a sense, a kind of a reoccurring trauma. That is how the media has been portraying it. I have a different perspective. I think that the language that we use when we speak about the conditions of artists in situations like the artists in Afghanistan, it's very important to make sure that we are not projecting so much energy of the victim onto their situation, because it doesn't help. And they're not victims. They are courageous, a very courageous sector of society that contributed greatly towards the civil society rebuilding of Afghanistan for years and years. And when even during the Taliban and rule in the 90s, when it was very brutal, there was a lot of bravery going on with the artistic sectors. And that's, and that includes the women's sector, obviously. So I think the first thing I would ask the international community and the media is to change the language around how artists are being spoken about, because they do have power. They will never lose their power. They have, they are battling having the opportunity to have visible and voices that could be heard, but it is not silenced, for sure. So I am not concerned exactly around, the situation. I'm not going to talk about the politics. I'm not going to talk about, I think that we have so much hope. The artistic and cultural sector of the country may be in shock, but they are never going to give up, and they're going to be part of the reestablishing of a government that's going to be serving the well-being of the collective society. And I think that what I would like to convey, the second message, is for those who do want to come out, they can really use some help right now. And they can use more help, in fact, from the neighboring countries and the countries within Asia. I'm not sure why do we always have to rely on Western nations, European nations, and the United States. Obviously, they have their challenges, and their immigration system and their immigration policy right now is not as welcoming as it should be towards a group of sector of people that really deserve and need to and should be given opportunity to resettle and exit out. So my appeal is to countries like Sri Lanka and India and Pakistan and Iran and Tajikistan and Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all of these nations that are, quite incredibly connected to this country, so much more than any other nation in the West is, for them to open their doors to make opportunities from residencies to professional positions in universities to gallery directorship positions, possibly music, film, video, all kinds of skills that so many of these incredible artists have, just like artists in any sector of the world. Most artists will have other kinds of skills to fall back on in order to make their artwork freely. And Afghan artists are no different. They have incredible skills in teaching, writing, in painting and video and filmmaking. So there's a lot of talent. And I think our focus needs to be not on complaining about what's going on, but on the outreach and support and really opportunity for these artists to resettle for a while so that they can catch their breath and be supported in the opportunity to contribute back to the country. Because no one, is from the country is ever going to not feel compelled to be connected back to the country. And so I think by investing all our energy in positively supporting the artists and cultural workers in Afghanistan, we're really giving the entire region of Asia an opportunity as well, because it is time for us, the inter-Asian relationships, to be much, much stronger, that we become supporters of one another's causes. And we're not always looking out to another direction, having that Western gaze. The gaze needs to be inward. This is why these conflicts are constantly happening around us, constantly happening in various different countries in Asia. It's because it's time for us all to really, take all of that trauma or all of that narrative of colonialism completely and transform it into self-regulation, self-responsibility, self-inspiration, and a communal sharing.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. When we look at what is happening in our own neighborhood, it is going to have an impact first on us. It has an impact on Europe, on America, much later down the road. But it does have an impact at some point. But we've got to be concerned. We've got to be focused. We've got to be, as you mentioned, creating some of those opportunities, which are wonderful, some of those ideas that you suggested, where it's not as though you need to go to a Western country only if you want to seek refuge. This is something that we don't see happening very much. Maybe there are certain stigmas associated with it. When you say refugee, in the current context or in the latter half of the last century, what we have seen is people wanting to go to the West. It's been seeking refuge in the West. This is, I guess, an attitude or a mindset that we've also got to start changing. We've also got to be welcoming of people. Because at the end of the day, Leeza, I'm sure you'll also agree, countries have been generating refugees for a long time, all countries. At some point in their history, countries in Europe saw an exodus of refugees at one time. Now we see an inflow into Europe. Countries like my own, countries in South Asia, we've had people who have left our countries. It's also time for us to welcome people into our countries. That is something, I guess, important that we need to reflect on. If I were to just ask you, we saw some very harrowing images of artists burning their art. I remember seeing images where the artist's face was blocked out, but they were setting fire to some of their paintings or whatever they had created. We also saw some of the murals that had been painted in some of the main cities like Kabul being painted over. Why is art seen as such a threat?
Well, I find even the act of burning and the act of destroying itself powerful acts of art. Unfortunately, when it's done by the other and in a forceful or as an act of fear, it's not art. But the image that you described just now, there's, you know, again, going back to how do we interpret images? How do we speak a language that moves away from crisis and trauma and opens up light and opportunity for a different destiny, for us to recreate our own destinies out of images that are wanted, that are positive, that are harmonious, that are human, a part of the human family living harmoniously and well together. So I would say that if the artist did do that, to me, it's not a great loss, and it's not something that we need to lament on for so long or for any reason, because it's part of the reality of the history of violence and conflict, and focusing on it in that way doesn't really contribute much to the conversation. What we can talk about is how can we support these artists to continue their practice despite the fact that they cannot actually do it physically right now. The most important thing is not the artwork itself, the object. It is the channel, the spirit that channels that. And that's live and well, and that's the artist. That is who we should be paying all our attention to and be concerned about their well-being. And not only in focusing from the perspective of the limitations that they're facing right now, but the perspective of the reality that there's never limitation when we put our hearts on. And in this moment, thankfully, we can support them in very simple forms, from just thinking positively that their situation will change every day, and asking God and the source energy in our own daily moments whenever we think of their situation in a positive light. And that's going to shift things. If we keep seeing negative images surrounding the artists, we're not really helping them energetically. And that's what they need most. They need to remember that they're being remembered, and that's enough. That is already enough. They need to know that they will have mentorship no matter what. They need to know that even if they cannot come out of the house for a while, it's not forever. You know, all of these things are what we need to really be focusing on. And at least that's what myself and a group of really amazing young individuals from across all you know, sectors of the art, but also different age groups and backgrounds, Americans, Asians, you know, the diaspora here, as part of our initiative, Arts for Afghanistan. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to think ahead, think about now, think about the urgency of their livelihood more than anything. Can we help them stay and remain in communication? Can we help them make sure that their WhatsApps are on, that they can communicate to the outside world? Can we make sure that they have enough food to have and be able to, at least in their minds, think about the art that they will make in the future, or find ways to imagine things that they can record in some other ways. There's you know, thousands of artists who have discovered, who've done incredible work because of the conflict or the limitations that they've lived in. 20, 30, 60 years later, we find extraordinary works that were made at that time or imagined because of the situations that they were battling. So it's not necessarily a doomsday story entirely.
There's a nurturing of some sort that is happening of the spirit, I guess, there, where you are being inspired that much more to produce, to present your ideas, your thoughts. Maybe that's coming out in that process through. When we talk about women's representation in the country, it is virtually absent from the table. How concerning is this in a country in which, if I'm not mistaken, there's approximately 48% of the population who are women? How concerning is this?
Well, it's not concerning to me and to the women that have been doing what they need to be doing, no matter what has been going on in Afghanistan. It's been over 45 years and some sort of conflict or another. And in fact, we should be more concerned about the men. The men are in danger. They're so much more vulnerable than women. Women have learned how to operate from limitations. They have learned how to be invisible and yet be the powerhouses underneath it all. They ran the hospitals and they ran universities. They ran all kinds of like ministries when everyone was at war during the Russian invasion and the Mujahideen period. They did covert forms of connecting and educating their daughters and sons during the Taliban in their basements, and they'll find a way to exert and exercise power in one form or another. They're not going to be silenced. They're going to find representation because they're nature. They are nature. You cannot shut down nature. And that's something that I think the masculine energy has to, or the true masculine energy supports feminine energy. And I think that we have, as societies, as modern societies, have a lot to reconnect with the actual makeup of the universe and the polar opposite, positive, negative, feminine, masculine, and the importance of these two poles to one another. It's something that it's not just happening in Afghanistan, but across the whole world. There needs to be a re-education of what femininity truly means and what masculinity truly is, and how the only way that there's prosperity and well-being and wealth in any country or any region of the world or in a family, it's when the two energies collaborate and are harmonious with one another. And I believe that despite the situation right now, there is that energy operating. It's not visible. And that's why the world is going on, because yes, there's like a few thousand people or maybe more that have lost their ways and want to dominate and want to use negative energy of fear. But in response to that, there's just that much, so much more powerful opposite energy flowing. So for me, I have incredible amounts of hope for the women of Afghanistan. I think they're resilient and they're going to find forms of, and I'm not discounting the situation right now. It's not that I'm not recognizing what is going on. What I'm saying is it's nothing new, and that it is just a new form of that will allow them to become even more powerful in who they are in the future. This kind of a government, this kind of a society will not last.
Absolutely amazing when you listen to what you are saying right now, Leeza, the way you are reflecting upon it. It's true resilience. You said they are powerhouses, they are powers beneath in society. They have been supporting the men of the society. They've been bringing up families. They've been helping to educate their children. They've been helping to earn some kind of income to support whatever the families are.
They were business women. Do you understand that in the last 20 years, more businesses were opened by women than men? They were supporting their men. I mean, these are the stories that are not told.
Exactly.
Why? Because it's easier to constantly repeat the disempowering negative stories than the actual dual opposites that are also occurring. The more we begin to tell these stories, the more power we give, the more space we give for them to come to gain more momentum and inspire others as well.
When the stories that have to come into the limelight, as you mentioned, these stories must come out. These stories must be heard. The fact that more women have opened enterprises in the last 20 years is amazing.
They were journalists. They were camera women. They were in universities teaching. The majority of the art students in Kabul University for years and years was mostly women that entered the university studying art. And in different forms in terms of society, building society, they were absolutely involved, and they created and carved out with very difficulty, but at the same time with a lot of desire and inspiration. And I think that and they're not giving up. People are not talking about how the women are finding ways to go out in the street and still protest, and they're still finding ways to communicate. There are leaders who have not given up their positions, who are demanding that they be included. So there are things going on and underneath all of like what is actually showing up in the news that we can think about and give power to.
Absolutely.
And support.
Absolutely. Leeza, I'm sure you are hearing reports from back home. You must be having family, you have friends back in Afghanistan. What we see on the media, very dire humanitarian crisis unfolding. They're talking about the pandemic and the impact that is having on the country, on the population. On top of that, there's the winter. So nature, they've got to adapt to those kind of situations. It's not something new. It's something that has been there every year. But it's that much more difficult. How concerning is the situation? What is the situation on the ground? What are you hearing coming out of Afghanistan?
Well, the beauty of Afghan people are that they're two things. They're incredibly generous and hospitable people, and they're also incredibly proud. So, I wouldn't hear very directly someone actually saying, I'm having a really hard time, you need to send me money. It's something that you have to feel for and know that it is the case. I do think that it is a situation that is perhaps quite dire when it comes to daily survival, and that should be a priority for all of us to think about. Again, without making it into too much of a sorrow story, finding ways to support individuals be able to continue to have a living, because right now there's still a lot that this new government needs to figure out in terms of having been shunned out of their own financial banking system, and I think connectivity with the international communities, financial communities, as well as like the neighboring. There's just, on the one hand, it's like so many messages that are being given to this country. They're made to feel like they're important, and yet they're abandoned simultaneously, and basically left to fend for themselves. And that is, I think, quite irresponsible and not helpful or productive at all. We do need to focus on establishing order and communication with the various different agencies and individuals who are going to, whether for good or bad in this new regime, are going to be running things. And shutting down complete communication with them or collaboration is just shutting down connection to and with the population. It is not going to serve them. It's just going to make things a lot more difficult for those on the ground. So I think that as I said, for us, right now we're trying to really keep connection and make sure that we are moving forward the possibility of helping some of the individuals who are able to leave and want to leave and who have strong backgrounds of being able to actually stand on their own 2 feet and be able to change their reality and transform themselves in new situations. So we have that going on, and at the same time, we are trying to see how we could, it took a long time for us to even realize that how to send money. We weren't able to send money, everything was shut down. And in this moment, things have opened up greatly, and there's reorganization of various sort of sectors of society. And I think to some degree, for the sake of people and for the sake of their well-being and just daily lifeline, we need to be a lot more collaborative.
Absolutely, absolutely. Leeza, finally, if I were to ask you, you've given us several different ideas, suggestions for potential, for opportunity, how we can enhance, how we can collaborate that much further. What would you say are 1 or 2, maybe 3 key priorities that the international community, and when I say international community, I'm also reflecting how you defined it, all countries. We're not talking about only countries in one part of the world. What can be done right now? What should we be doing right now? What message would you like to give out?
I think the number 1 thing would be to keep an open, positive mind about the situation in Afghanistan, and to make thinking about the population the priority, thinking about their well-being and their prosperity. I'm going to say that word, like, beyond just their well-being, their prosperity, and their ability to transform the situation to actually work for them as a country. For us to stop thinking that we have the answers, but we don't. We don't have the answers for the various different sectors of society, races, tribes. It's a very diverse, very complex, incredibly woven people in this country, and we need to regard that having these narrow-minded, knee-jerk reaction responses to what has happened is not productive. We need to just make priority of supporting mentally, energetically, financially, opening the doors for immigration, opening doors for professional exchange. It doesn't have to be refugee fear of, forever there's going to be burdening of these people in the neighboring countries or in the Western countries. We can rely on the fact that when the regime changed and the Americans were able to establish a new situation, and the Afghan government was established 20 years ago. Within those first 5 years, you had millions of Afghans who were in the neighboring countries return back. Kabul went from a 1 million city to 1 million people, a couple of million people city, to like something like 6, 8 to 7 million people in just a few years. So what I'm saying is change is part of reality that we need to absolutely count on and make sure that we're collaborating with change in the positive. And it's part of positive manifestations.
It's the outlook, it's the attitude that we adopt, it's the way we examine it, the way we reflect upon it. The glass could be half full, the glass could be half empty at this point. And this is where we've got to look at the potential of what can be done, trying to work out what should be done, assisting, helping this country. Thank you so very much for giving us of your time, but also for sharing very thought-provoking ideas of making us widen our horizons in looking at this situation, of understanding what is going on in Afghanistan. Especially, I'm going back to that point you talked about women, and you said it's a very strong, they're a powerhouse, they're a power behind society which you don't see. And this is a wonderful way of examining it, Leeza. I'm very, very amazed just hearing that, the way you are asking us to reflect upon this issue, even when it comes to the office.
I would say, I was thinking about this, George, when you sent me these beautiful questions. Gandhi wouldn't have changed the faith of India and the continent, the South continent, in the way that he did without having that one principle in mind, and the principle of nonviolent as power. Now, it's the extension of that is seeing the possibility of transformation from conflict and crisis. It is an opportunity, and it's an opportunity for bettering what is. And that's why it happens. Conflict and trauma and war happens because there's an opportunity for bettering. That's how the universe works. And Gandhi knew the power of how resisting without resisting, resisting energetically is so much more powerful than resisting with force. And that's the kind of idea I feel that we need to bring to situations, not only in Afghanistan, but in Myanmar, and also obviously whenever there's eruptions of stuff going on in Sri Lanka and elsewhere in the world, in South America, in Central America, all these nations, we can really begin to look at the opportunities in these awful appearing scenarios.
These are values that are entrenched in our society, and we should be reflecting upon them, using them, turning to them once again. And that's something that you've diverted our attention towards. Thank you very much for doing that. Thank you so much for joining us on Afghan Views and sharing, opening minds.
Thank you so much for having me, for the program, for thinking about. I think that just our conversation today will contribute quite what is necessary for the energy of the people. So thank you so much for doing this and for including me, and feel free to cut this down a little if necessary. And I wish you all the best in your endeavors with the rest of this project and everything else that you're doing in your country.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Leeza. Thank you very much. Our guest today on Afghan Views, it was Leeza Ahmedy, the Director of Programming at the Foundation for Spirituality and the Arts, which is based in New York and in Charleston. She's also on the board of directors of the Asia Contemporary Art Forum in the Art Week, who shared with us a very different perspective of trying to understand, try to widen our own opinions, our horizons, the way we examine the situation, look at what is happening in Afghanistan. So that's it on this episode of Afghan Views. Join us again when we have another issue that we bring to the forefront on the Awarelogue initiative, as we endeavor to enhance awareness and generate further dialogue on issues within the realm of international relations. Thank you.
Thank you.